Alright, so today we're going to go over Rocannon's World by Ursula K Le Guin. It's the first book in the Hainish series and Ursula K Le Guin's debut. Alright, so now we're going to get into Ursula K Le Guin's biography and what we know about her and her life. So Le Guin was born in Berkeley, California to a pair of anthropologist parents. She married Charles Le Guin in 1953 and she began writing full time later in that decade. Le Guin had three older brothers, and that includes Carl, who was a kind of well known literary scholar. Her undergraduate degree came from Harvard and it was in French and Italian literature. She later earned a master's degree in French from Columbia. So both her undergraduate degrees and her graduate degree were from Ivy League schools. She moved to Portland with her small family in 1959, and or at least she lived there. Her and her husband lived there for the rest of her life. The city was important for her writing. It's the setting of the novel The Lathe of Heaven, The Lath of Heaven, which is one of her more well-known books. It's probably my favorite book by her, although there are a few other contenders. I really like The Dispossessed as well. So she had two daughters and one son, and she died in 2018 of a heart attack after experiencing poor health for a few months prior to her death. So Taoism, Buddhism, the works of Carl Jung, and anthropology as a science influenced her and her writing a lot. Le Guin broke into the mainstream with The Left Hand of Darkness, which won both the Hugo and Nebula Awards, and her Earthsea series. So Left Hand of Darkness is part of the Hainish cycle, which is an interconnected series of novels and short stories centered on anthropological themes. It also has a lot to do with exploring space and the growth and evolution of humanity as they spread across the cosmos. And then the Earthsea series is a fantasy YA series. Her short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelis, is perhaps her most well-known work. It explores utilitarian themes. Utilitarianism is a school of philosophy. I think you can kind of summarize it by saying the needs of the many over the needs of the few. And that short story is commonly taught in high schools and college. I taught the short story to college freshmen, and looking back on it, they mostly focused on the story's similarities with the philosophical thought experiment, the trolley problem, which is so hot right now. She was honored as a sci-fi Grand Master in 2003, and she won a National Book Foundation Award for her entire career. It was rewarding her entire career. That was in 2014. Her books have sold millions of copies and have been translated into over 40 languages. She's the source of the word ansible, a word and concept later used by other writers such as Orson Scott Card. While I've enjoyed the work of Orson Scott Card that I've read, I really don't like Orson Scott Card as a person due to his views on the LGBT community. So it's my personal view that Le Guin is the best sci-fi writer of the last 60 to 70 years. Although there are other writers such as Gene Wolfe, Stanislaw Lem, who I really enjoy and am hoping to do some videos over here in the future. Octavia Butler is also up there, as is Philip K. Dick and Frank Herbert. That's kind of a small list of contenders. Alright, so now we're going to get into the world of Rocannon's world. Kind of explain some of the world building that Le Guin did. So this book is part of the Hainish cycle, and it's her introduction to the universe she would later explore in books such as Left Hand of Darkness, The Dispossessed, and The Word for World is Forest. Rocannon's world is set on a planet called Fomalhaut 2, although the name of the planet will be changed by the novel's end. The planet has been ruled exempt from exploration to allow the native humanoid species to develop and evolve naturally. There are still some explorers, Hainish explorers, hanging around. But I think that more speaks to the fact that they're not supposed to interfere or give technology to the native species. So initially, the narrator of the book describes three of these humanoid species. There's the dwarf-like Jademar, who are also the most technologically advanced. And then there's the Fia, who some describe as being similar to elves. And then there's the Angyar, who are the most like humans. So the Fia and the Jademar both use telepathy to communicate with their own species. And when either of those groups are in groups, they will speak with one voice pretty often. There are two other humanoid species introduced later in the novel, the winged ones and the Liuar. The Liuar are also capable of telepathy. I guess the winged ones could be too. It's just not. They don't seem to really communicate verbally, so there's not a lot known about the winged ones. So Rocannon, the character, spends most of his time with Angyar people. They are organized into a feudal type culture with like kings and queens and fiefs and lieges and all that. So Rocannon does have Hainish accomplices, like I said, who are studying the world, although they die pretty early on in the book, and we don't even get. I guess we maybe get some of their names, but they're not major characters. There's another alien presence on the world, and these are the main villains of the novel. They're originally from a world called Faraday, and these villains have revolted against the greater Hainish coalition, and they've attacked Rocannon's Hainish accomplices in their spaceship. Their spaceship has been shot down. So the Angyar travel with the help of these like tiger-like wind steeds. Many forms of life on the planet can fly due to the world having low amounts of gravity. So the planet experiences an 800-day year split into hot years and cold years. These are not actual years. These are just actually just half-year seasons, although they are around the same kind of length as years on Earth. I think that the length of the day in Rocannon's world is about 28 hours per day, so that would also make the years a little bit longer. The world features several continents, although the action takes place on just two of those continents. So now I'm going to do a plot summary of the entirety of Rocannon's world. There will obviously be some spoilers in this part, and afterwards we'll get into some analysis and opinions on the work. So the book opens with a description of the three types of humanoids in the world where everything takes place. And the opening centers on a woman named Semele, a princess who endeavors to find a sapphire necklace that her husband's family had won in battle, but they had somehow misplaced the necklace a long, long time ago. So she goes on this journey, and the journey takes her to the leaders of both the Fia and the Jademar. She herself is part of the Angyar. So the Jademar, who are cave dwelling, as I've said, and they're quite advanced. They drug her and her wind steed, and they take her on a journey to another planet, where she finds the necklace and is gifted the necklace, the sapphire necklace. So then, helped by her like winged tiger, like a wind steed, she makes it home to her home castle, only to discover that everyone she knows is either quite old or already dead, and she herself is not significantly older than when she left. So I think it's about 10 years have passed since she left, but for her it's just been a day or two, maybe 3. So now part 1, chapter 1. There's a seemingly artificial cataclysm destroys the Hainish ship, which had been studying the world. The lone survivor, Rocannon, explains to a local their predicament, that a civil war among the Hainish civilization has begun, and the planet may be caught in the crossfire. So then part 1, chapter 2, Rocannon and his accomplice, Mojian, who's a pretty big character, they seek help from the species of humanoids that dwell underground, but they are rejected by these people. They then come across the last surviving member of a colony of Fia, whose village was destroyed by the invaders. That guy's name is Kaio. He's also a pretty big character. And then Rocannon hears some transmissions from an enemy Ansible and tentatively plans to go to the Ansible and ask for the help of other Hainish worlds against the invaders of the planet. Then in Part 1, Chapter 3, Rocannon receives the Sapphire Amulet from the beginning of the book. He receives it from the female leader of Mojian'S kingdom. That female leader predicts that Mojian will not make it back from their impending quest. Mojian and Rocannon and a few others fly off to make their way towards the enemy Ansible, and they eventually come across a few settlements, the last of which they kind of quickly conquer, and they take the enemy ships. The reason they're taking ships is because while they do have flying wind steeds, the flying wind steeds will not fly over water. Rocannon does take an arrow to the leg during the fighting, although it's not really a major issue for him going forward. Rocannon and Mojian and the rest journey across the sea in 2 boats. One of the boats capsizes, which kills one of the sailors and also kills 2 of their wind steeds. The other boat, which is now very crowded, reaches the southern continent they were journeying to. As they work their way down the beach, Rocannon falls behind of the rest of the group, and he's captured by Zagama's men. Zagama is a local lord on this other continent. He is then held prisoner by Zagama and is repeatedly saved by his metal bodysuit, which is the last of the foreign tech that he has. He lost a bunch of his technological stuff in the boat capsizing. So he's starving and he's thirsty and he's tied up for a couple days. They keep on trying to burn him, but his special metal suit doesn't allow him to be touched by the flames. So then at the end of the chapter, nearing death, he's finally offered water by an unknown character. And it turns out that the boy that Mojian tried to send back home, Yahan, so Mojian tried to send him back home when they reached the new continent to try to save a ship or something. So Yahan fell in with Zagama's men because he was taken to be a local. And then Rocannon fearlessly escapes by grabbing a piece of the fire, like a piece of firewood that's already on fire. And he advances on Zagama and drives him all the way out of his little hut thing and into the wilderness. Whereas Zagama kind of gives up on recapturing Rocannon, and Rocannon is joined by Yahan. The 2 of them make their way south. They find some food and water here and there. They eventually come across a local who offers them food and lodging, which is much needed. The local is quickly joined by others, and then they all agree to sail Rocannon and Yahan south across a wide bay that would take them many days to go around if they couldn't go across in a boat. So that saves them about a week or so of walking. But these locals threaten to kill Rocannon and Yahan if they do not pay them for the passage with the Sapphire Amulet. So yeah, they want to be paid with the Sapphire Amulet so that they'll take the boat across. So Rocannon gives in and tells them that he'll give them the Sapphire Amulet, mostly in order to save him and Yahan from being killed. So they make their way across the bay and south, and they give over the Sapphire Amulet when they make it to the opposite shore. And then they're eventually discovered by a group of people who are flying wind steeds, flying on top of wind steeds. So Rocannon and Yahan are reunited with Mojian. They make their way south and deeper into the previously unexplored continent. So this is a separate continent from where the action began. Mojian reveals that his ancestors passed through these lands on their way to settle the north. Mojian also reveals that he got the Sapphire Amulet back by killing the people that took it from Rocannon and Yahan. So then one night, as the group sleeps around a dead fire, they are attacked by a large group of winged humanoids. The group wakes up in a miraculously high-tech city. They're all drugged and strung up, and Rocannon escapes his the binding that holds him, and he explores the city. He does find that the winged humanoids are quite advanced, that they're perhaps deaf and mute, and they seem vampiric. So Rocannon discovers that their enemies are actually vampiric, and they are societally kind of insect-like. There's like larvae that they feed, and they seem to be kind of like a beehive or something, like organized in that way. So him and his companions, they're freed by the southern continent version of the Fia. And then the group regains their flying steeds and make their way further south, going deeper and deeper into a large set of mountains. They continually find more and more Fia settlements. And finally, Kaio, the one Fia in their group, chooses to stay with one of the settlements rather than continue on with the rest of the group. So the group, minus Kaio, make their way further into the mountains. They are struggling more and more because there's so little food and water around. And because of how high up they are, the wind steeds aren't getting enough oxygen, so they're not as able to fly for long distances. Rocannon comes across a new species of humanoid that I think that there had only been rumors of. These humanoids, Rocannon goes into their cave, and they somehow gift Rocannon the power of telepathy. This initially kind of bothers Rocannon, and kind of he struggles with this newfound power. But Rocannon and Yahan are discovered by an enemy helicopter, and Mojian saves them from the helicopter, and it seems like Mojian dies in the process, although we are not explicitly given that he dies. And then Rocannon and Yahan find refuge with a humanoid group of the same type as Mojian, so they're like the Angyar. Rocannon is treated like a god for some reason. He, on his own, makes his way to the enemy base, the one that has the Ansible, and he sends off a message by that Ansible. And in that message, he reveals the enemy's plans on taking over the world and where they are on the world. He makes his way back to where he left Yahan in the village of Angyar. He thinks the entire time that he got lost along the way, and that he may have gotten lost, or that he sent the Ansible message to the wrong coordinates, and that everything was in vain. But the Hainish send a nuclear bomb that destroys the enemy's base. The reason that is possible is because they're able to send bombs and non-human stuff, like non-living stuff, at faster than light. But I think things that are like living have to travel at almost the speed of light, but not quite. Then we get an epilogue where Yahan leaves to go home, and Rocannon stays with the people in the mountains until his eventual death, which is before the rest of the Hainish arrive. So he notes that he feels like he has no home, but a home with the mountain people is better than anywhere else. And then the Hainish arrive and decide to name the planet after him. They name the planet Rocannon's World. Alright, so hopefully you enjoyed that plot summary. Now we're going to get into my favorite parts of the book. So one of my favorite parts is the ending. It's quite fitting and quite climactic. The description of the transgalactic bomb going off is very well done. It's only implied that it's a nuclear bomb, but you can kind of tell that that's what it is. I think nuclear bombs show up in other books in the Hainish series. So the depiction of Rocannon gaining telepathic powers and the rules of telepathy is quite well done, and it makes a lot of sense. Rocannon, whenever he's sensing people nearby and their thoughts, knows that he can't focus on them too much, because then they'll be aware of him being around, and although they get like a weird sneaking suspicion that there's someone around. So the part where Mojian dies in a blaze of glory was really cool. It's a very fitting and cool ending to his character. The opening prelude with Semele was published as a standalone story and reads really easily and is super dreamlike, which I enjoyed. Johann is depicted as super loyal to Rocannon, which is a cool character trait and is explored in a cool way. I love the part where Rocannon's bodysuit saved him from Zagama and the fire. It was trippy to picture, and it's really cool. The thing about his bodysuit, which I didn't get into, is that it makes him look like he's nude, but he's still wearing the bodysuit, so it's some type of transparent metal that he's wearing. And then Mojian's personal journey over the course of the book is really cool. He seems to really come into his own and kind of find himself through serving Rocannon and doing his part to help save the world that's his homeworld. And overall, basically, the whole book was just really solid and well done. So now we're going to get into some analysis. As I think I've gone into, this was Le Guin's first published novel, and it's a pretty amazing book when it's viewed through the lens of it being her debut. It doesn't quite reach the highs of what was later to come, but it is really good. Almost all of the aspects of what would fuel her fame are here. The fleshed out three-dimensional characters, the fantastic descriptions in general, and especially of the settings. She does a really good job of writing about landscapes and nature. There's in-depth world building that is very logical. It just kind of makes sense innately. There's in all of her books, there's a sense of the plot and the setting taking place in a larger universe with many working parts. This is especially true of the Hainish books. There's a lack of excess language, especially in Rocannon's world. She gets a little bit more wordy later in her career. But there's an anthropological and objective narrator and main character, which is also a recurring theme. And there's a mixture of science fiction with elements of fantasy literature, which is also kind of a thing that she does some, is mix science fiction with fantasy. So, speaking of that, there are almost more fantasy elements than science fiction elements in this book, but given some of the technology present in the story and the technology's importance to the story, and especially the climax and the world's place in the greater universe, I would still classify this work as science fiction, although it's definitely not hard science fiction. I get kind of frustrated with the delineation between hard and soft sci-fi. I feel like it's kind of overblown, and I have seen some people online argue that Le Guin's use of sociology and anthropology should count as a sort of hard sci-fi. And soft science fiction and science fantasy are kind of different phrases that describe the same thing. I do think that calling Rocannon's world soft sci-fi does seem to be a bit of a disservice to Le Guin. Her writing is so focused on anthropology and sociology, and those are both technically sciences. So calling the novel sci-fi is somewhat regressive, but so is calling it fantasy. So really it's just a mixture of the two. Robert Silverberg, who I've read a few short stories by him over the last month or two. I'm hoping to get to Dying Inside by him pretty soon, because of the guy from Moid from Media Death Cult seems to really enjoy Dying Inside, and I want to read it. But I'm not sure I really agree with Rocannon's world being called a space opera. I don't know. And the rules of the book and the world are consistent, and they're also consistent with other works in the series, which can be hard to do. Not everyone is capable of doing that. And then I'm not sure about the science behind faster than light travel in the book, but it seems like kind of the standard sci-fi type stuff with like faster than light travel and almost faster than light travel and time dilation and stuff. It seems like kind of typical of how that's treated in sci-fi. So my opinions of the book does feature aspects of the new wave movement in sci-fi of the 1960s. One of my favorite parts about the book is that how quickly the plot moves. Like, we don't ever linger anywhere for too long, and the momentum that starts at the beginning just kind of increases rather than decreases. It just kind of goes and goes and goes. Yeah, every chapter builds on what came before it and often betters what came before. And this leads to a sense of the book getting better and better the deeper into it you get, which is true for a lot of her books. That being said, I did really enjoy the opening prelude with Semele searching for the necklace. I enjoyed that part a lot. Alright, so we're getting to the end, and my grade for the book is a B/B plus. I think that if I hadn't read her other books, I would give it a higher grade. Maybe an A minus, a B plus, A minus, something like that. But as it's, pretty, it's good, but it's not as good as what she's later capable of. But it is greatly enjoyable. I would recommend this book. So yeah, thanks for listening. If you could like the video and possibly subscribe to my channel, I would appreciate it. Thanks.